All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Les Smith. I am with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's conversation concerning the Oscoda area and former Ward Smith Air Force Base PFAS update meeting. This has been a series of conversations over the past year. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the virtual microphone over to Sue Manente with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Hi, everyone. And as Les said, thank you for joining us. We know many of you have been with us on this journey for a while, and hopefully we have some new attendees tonight as well. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing some updates from EGLE. We'll have some updates from MDHHS, and then we'll have time for comments, questions, and answers. And we'll hopefully conclude the meeting around 8 o'clock. We are going to provide updates on the PFAS investigation, on continued quarterly monitoring, the AuSable Township residential well results, the substantive requirements document, and then entering foam reports into MyWaters. And then MDHHS is going to provide a summary of the resampling that we conducted this year, and we're also starting the second round. We'll have some fish and deer updates, some reminders of the Clark's Marsh advisories, the foam advisory, and we'll talk a little bit about the exposure assessment. So before we move on, Les is going to give us some information about the webinar and how to use Zoom.
Hey, thanks, Sue. For this is going to be new for a few people and repeat for many, but again, thank you for joining us for this conversation this evening. Just a reminder that your lines are all muted, so we can't hear you, but there is a way for you to talk to us tonight, and that's going to be the next coming slide. Also want to remind everyone that the webinar is recorded, and we will provide that, make that available a few days following tonight's conversation. In terms of communicating with us tonight, there's multiple ways. You may type your question at any time during the presentations this evening in the questions box or the Q&A box located in the bottom of your screen. Feel free to type your questions in. We already have one question already, so feel free to use that if you have any questions tonight. You also will have the opportunity during the question and answer portion of tonight's meeting to electronically raise your hand using the hand icon located at the bottom of your screen. Now, for our attendees who are listening by phone only this evening, and we have one, to our panelists, we do have one person on the phone. For the person on the phone, we want to make sure that the person uses the pound and the number 2 key. I know it says *9, but it should be #2 for the person that's on the phone. So we will electronically see your hand, and we'll reach out to you so you can talk to tonight's panel. With that, Sue, I hand it back to you.
Thanks, Les. Before we get started, I'd like to ask if we have any legislators or their representatives joining us, and if so, if you would please introduce yourselves. If you're unable to mute.
I have unmuted. Okay. Go ahead.
This is Jake Bennett in Congressman Kilde's office.
Hi, Jake. And then I'd also like to ask if we have any local officials with us that would like to introduce themselves. And we'll give you just a minute to unmute. All right. Well, next.
We have Michael Mitchell.
Oh, okay.
Michael Mitchell, Oscoda Township Superintendent.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for joining us. All right, well, let's get started with the presentations. I'd like to introduce Beth Place, who's the project manager with EGLE in the Remediation and Redevelopment Division. Beth?
Thank you, Sue. I am, as Sue said, I'm the EGLE project manager for the former Ward Smith Air Force Base. And this presentation will be a little bit different than some of my previous ones. We just wanted to give a little bit more background, just a little bit for some folks who may be new to some of these meetings. And so I'll start off just so people know. Former Wart Smith Air Force Base was first established in 1923. It's located in Oscoda, Iosco County, Michigan, and it served primarily as a combat crew and bomber training base throughout its 70-year history. Wart Smith was selected for closure under the 1991 Base Realignment and Closure Act, otherwise known as BRAC, and it officially closed on June 30th of 1993. Under BRAC, the Air Force is responsible for investigating and, if necessary, addressing any environmental contamination caused by Air Force actions while operating Wart Smith, and has invested over $80 million in BRAC cleanup actions. The cleanup currently is being conducted under the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act, or CERCLA. EGLE is the state regulatory and support agency for the former Wart Smith Air Force Base environmental restoration. And often our state laws come in as applicable or relevant and appropriate requirements, otherwise known as ARARs. Next slide, please, Sue. Okay. So to start off with, we're going to go back to the timeline of when EGLE first became aware of PFAS at the former Wart Smith Air Force Base. So that was back in 2010 with samples collected by EGLE. And then we confirmed that PFAS was in groundwater, surface water, soil, and biota from AFFF use on the former base. This prompted Air Force to begin base-wide sampling in 2012 to 2013, which led to the installation of the FTO2 treatment system, the pump and treat groundwater system, and PFAS treatment at that system began in 2014. The Air Force began the preliminary assessment in 2016 and continued into the site inspection phase, which included this expanded site inspection in 2018 to 2019. Also around this 2016 to 2017 timeframe, EGLE began their investigation outside the base boundary around the Oscoda area that included residential well sampling and the installation of groundwater monitoring wells and surface water sampling. From 2018 to 2019, Air Force completed 2 removal actions, including routing the benzene and aero groundwater extraction to the new central treatment system built to treat PFAS as a time-critical removal action. And then next, Air Force retrofitted the Mission Street groundwater treatment system, originally built to treat volatile contamination, and retrofitted it to treat PFAS contamination as a non-time critical removal action. During the same time frame, EGLE completed its groundwater flow study. You've also often heard of it as the transducer study on the east side of Van Etten Lake. In 2020 to 2021, where we are right now, so 2020 to present, the Air Force has begun planning the PFAS remedial investigation and 2 interim remedial actions. Next slide, please, Sue. Okay. And so right now on this slide, this is a tentative timeline of what you can see of the Air Force remedial investigation. And so Air Force and EGLE had planning meetings from August 2020 to February of 2021. Then Air Force took what they learned in those scoping meetings, or what we discussed, not really what they learned in those scoping meetings, and took our comments, our preliminary comments and discussions, and wrote a draft remedial investigation work plan. Right now, EGLE is reviewing that draft RI work plan, and we plan to provide our comments to Air Force in mid-May. After that, there will be, EGLE will also receive the draft risk assessment work plan, which is a separate document that's still part of the remedial investigation, but we'll also be reviewing that. Then on both of those documents, Air Force and EGLE will have comment resolution where we'll go back and forth with our comments. And from that, final remedial investigation and risk assessment work plan, 2 separate documents, will be finalized in approximately spring to summer 2021, with field work beginning in summer of 2021. And again, those are tentative timelines for the items that haven't happened yet. A lot of those timelines depend on comment resolution. Additionally, while completing the RI, Air Force is also installing 2 interim remedial actions. And so if you go to the next slide, Sue. Thank you. So you will see on the left, this is just a picture of the area you can see in the left-hand corner, Wart Smith Air Force Base, and where FTO2 on the base side, and then south of that, Clark's Marsh. You can also see the proposed additions to the treatment system. Those are the yellow wells, and the existing wells are the blue wells. Next slide, please. Okay. We began discussing the Clark's Marsh IRA back in September of 2021 with Air Force. In January and February, Air Force provided Eagle the draft interim proposed plan. Eagle reviewed that, and we went through comment resolution. And I think as many of you know, from March 18th to April 17th on the Clark's Marsh IRA interim proposed plan, there was a public comment period. So right now we're where that pink arrow is on this slide, and Air Force is currently going through public comments. And then those comments will be addressed in the record of decision. So once you get to the record of decision, the next steps are the Eagle and Air Force will be negotiating the draft record of decision and the draft remedial action work plan concurrently. And the remedial action work plan is where a lot of the technical details that a lot of us want to see, especially Eagle, and know about, that's where a lot of those questions will be answered. Then on both those documents, we'll go through comment resolution, Air Force and Eagle, and then Air Force will submit a final document. And then again, a tentative time frame, late summer 2021, construction will begin on the Clark's Marsh IRA, and startup and shakedown of the system in February to March of 2022. And again, tentative timeframes there. Next slide, please, Sue. And so when we're discussing the Van Etten Lake interim remedial action, we had the same planning meetings, but that started back in October of 2021. And now in the March to April timeframe, Air Force has provided Eagle the draft interim proposed plan for Van Etten Lake IRA, which is along Van Etten Lake near Ratliff Park, a series of extraction wells that'll be routed back to the central treatment system that's already on base. And so currently we're negotiating those comments. After that, Air Force will hold a public comment period, 30 days, and also a public meeting. Tentatively, this may be in May. It depends on our comment resolution timeframe, but just so folks know and aren't surprised by it, this could be as early as May 2021. And then it'll follow the same path where comments will be answered or comments will be addressed in the record of decision. Eagle and Air Force will negotiate that record of decision, as well as the remedial action work plan for the Van Etten Lake IRA. And that's where a lot of the details are. We'll go through comment resolution. Air Force will issue the final documents, and then hopefully construction will begin in late summer 2021 with startup and shakedown of the system in February to March of 2022. And again, that's a tentative schedule. Okay. Next slide, please, Sue. A few other items that have been going on, a few other updates are this figure on the right shows on the left the pink capture zone. This is These have been redrawn from Air Force documents, I believe the expanded site inspection. And the pink capture zone is near FTO2. And then at where you see the blue swirls, those are the caption zone of the Mission Street groundwater treatment system. And Eagle has asked Air Force to evaluate an additional intermediate action between FTO2 and Mission Street. Eagle thinks that we have sufficient information there on base in order to address the PFAS contamination in this area. So our division director, Mike Neller, sent a letter to Dr. Termath requesting that on March 23rd of 2021. And then other updates are that on February 19th of 2021, Eagle requested that Air Force sample the influent and effluent of the LF 3031 engineered wetland treatment system, an existing treatment system on base to treat volatiles, that they add PFAS sampling to their influent and effluent of that system. And responses to both those letters are and discussions are pending and ongoing. Okay. Next, Amanda Armbruster will be talking about the Oscoda area sites. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Good evening, everybody. Like Beth said, my name's Amanda Armbruster. I'm with the Remediation Redevelopment Division of Eagle. I'm a geologist and project manager working out of the Bay State District Office and the project manager for the Oscoda area sites. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other areas throughout Oscoda that we refer to as the Oscoda area sites that are separate from the Air Force Base, where we've identified PFAS in the groundwater. So go ahead. Thanks for changing slides, Sue. In 2017 and 2018, Eagle installed several monitoring wells throughout the Oscoda community. This figure right here shows the location of those wells. And for the past about year and a half, we've sampled about 20 to 30 of these wells on a quarterly basis. And I'm going to go through the next few slides and share those results for you for our most recent event that we have results back for, which is the January 2021 sampling event. And just to let everybody know, the results and some information about each of these sites is available on the MPART webpage. So next slide, please. Okay, this first location is the Cold Bath Road area. It's located on the northwest end of Van Etten Lake. And there were 2 monitoring wells sampled in this area that had PFAS above Eagle's drinking water cleanup criteria. And the contamination in this area is believed to be from a house fire that was put out using firefighting foam. Next slide, please. Okay, this area shows results for a couple monitoring wells that were sampled near Cedar Lake. This would be the southeastern end of the lake. Both of these wells were below our drinking water cleanup criteria in January of 2021. Next slide, please. This figure shows a bunch of locations that were sampled near Van Etten Lake. This is the southeastern portion of Van Etten Lake. There were 3 monitoring wells that we sampled that had exceedances of our drinking water criteria in January. One well is near the lake shore along Loud Drive, and the other 2 are near the southern tip of Van Etten Lake. Next slide, please. So this figure shows monitoring wells near the Oscoda Schools complex and along River Road. 2 of these wells exceeded our drinking water cleanup criteria in January. And this is another location where the contamination is associated with a former fire that was fought using firefighting foam. And the Oscoda Schools complex is on municipal water. Next slide, please. This last figure shows results for monitoring wells sampled in Au Township. One well had exceedances of our drinking water cleanup criteria in January. And this well is located near the intersection of Mill Street and Sunset Road. You can see it's the one that has the result highlighted in yellow. And this is actually a location that I spoke about during the last community meeting. We had exceedances in this well in October of 2020 as well. And we identified several nearby residential drinking water wells. We've since sampled those wells. We had 8 homeowners that agreed to let us sample their water, and all of those samples for all of those homes were below our drinking water cleanup criteria. And I think at this point we can go ahead and move on to our next speaker. His name is Charlie Bauer. He's with Eagle's Water Resources Division.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. My name is Charlie Bauer, and I'm the district supervisor out of the Bay City District Office. Tonight, I'm going to be going over the data that we receive on a monthly basis regarding discharge from the 3 treatment systems on Wurtsmith Air Force Base, FTO2, Central Treatment System, and Mission Street. Next slide, please. Hello? Yeah. So there are 3 basic roles that Water Resources Division plays at Wurtsmith. The first is water quality assessment and fish assessment, which our surface water assessment section does, and Brandon Armstrong is our representative for that. Second, we develop the substantive requirement documents, or in essence, a permit for the 3 treatment systems on the Wurtsmith Air Force Base. And Tarek Buckmaster from Permit Section is our representative for that. And then we do compliance and enforcement on the discharges from those 3 treatment systems. And Matt Seiler is the compliance person out of the Bay City District Office that does that. Next slide. So tonight I'm going to give a fairly broad overview of the data that we have. So the review of the discharge monitoring data submitted by the Air Force for the 3 treatment systems to give us an idea of compliance. In general, all 3 systems are working as expected. The effluent results for PFAS, PFOA, and the PFAS compounds with recent MCLs developed are generally below MCLs and or water quality standards, with a few exceptions. Next slide. So FTO2 was installed in 2014, 2015, so we have quite a bit of data on FTO2. The central treatment system was installed and operating in 2018, and Mission Street was installed and operating in 2019, so we have less data on those. Next slide. So instead of doing an overview or a summary of FTO2 for the first 3 years, Air Force had already done a pretty good summary of that. And for 2015, 2016, 2017, all of the average for PFAS and PFOA met our SRD criteria. At the bottom, you'll see that the non-detect samples were not included in the averages. And actually, that is a conservative approach. So it's only looking at the concentrations that actually break through the treatment system. So I used the same method in calculating the averages you're going to see here. Next slide. So this is FTO2 data from 2018 to present. A few things I wanted to point out. One, you'll notice that the average effluent is still fairly, still well below or very close to MCLs and water quality standards. I highlighted the maximum effluent of 141 because it's an outlier. It was not included in the average because it was identified as a sampling anomaly. And when I presented this earlier, I said we were going to follow up with the Air Force. We have, but we haven't gotten a complete answer on this. So we're going to still probe more. And when I do find out what happened there, I will let you know. But in general, this system is working very well. Most of the sampling results are non-detect. And when you do see detections, it's at a time where they have to change out the carbon. So it's at a breakthrough time. And everything after this sampling anomaly, which was in December of 2019, all the sampling results after that have been non-detect for this system. So I just wanted to identify that. And then also, there are several PFAS compounds that we don't have MCLs or water quality standards for. I wanted you to see what data we had, so I presented that, and it's there, but we don't have anything to evaluate it against. So next slide. Central treatment system, again, is working quite well. Even for PFAS, even the maximum effluent limits are below MCLs. PFOA is non-detect. It's working quite well. Next slide. And Mission Street also is working very well. They had a maximum effluent of 18 as a breakthrough, but the average overall is well below MCLs and water quality standards. And again, I'm only averaging the breakthrough numbers. If I actually averaged in all of the non-detect numbers, the averages would be lower. Next slide. So what do we do with this data? We use the data for compliance purposes. So every month we get discharge monitoring reports and we evaluate that data. We use that information to prepare for our inspections. Some of our inspections are less intense. So we go and we do a reconnaissance inspection. We'll do a file review before. We'll go out and we'll identify maybe a couple of things we want to highlight and talk to the facility about. And then we'll follow up with those issues. And then we also have a more detailed inspection, which is a compliance evaluation inspection that has a checklist that we run through, and it's much more detailed evaluation. And then we have a compliance sampling inspection where we do the checklist inspection, plus we do compliance sampling of the effluent. And we did that on August 21st, 2019. I think the important thing to note here is all of these inspections are unannounced. So well, in general, they're unannounced. So we go and we do our evaluation at the time. So when we came out to do the sampling inspection, the Air Force was not aware that we were coming out. We sampled it. One of the things we found out from that sampling inspection is that they were not providing us all the data that they were collecting for PFAS. So actually, we sent a compliance communication requiring that they provide that data. And that is the compliance communication that was sent on December 9th, 2019. But we also use this information, the inspection information and compliance information, to take appropriate enforcement actions. And in January of 2018, we required the Air Force to install the central treatment system They had a date, a required date in their SRD to have it installed by. They didn't meet that date, so we sent a violation notice and put them on a schedule to get that installed as quickly as possible. In March of 2018, we required the Air Force to meet SRD monitoring requirements, and we are currently working out a monitoring plan with them so that we make sure that we're getting all of the information we need on these systems. And then October 19th, 2018, we required the Air Force to improve the FTO2 capture and treatment. And they are working on doing the interim remedial action now, and we're working through that process with them. And again, through our compliance sampling inspection, we required the Air Force to provide us all of the PFAS data, which I'm now presenting to you tonight. Next slide. So that's it. Again, this is my contact information and Matt Seiler's contact information. And now I'm going to turn it over to Matt Seiler to talk about foam entries, foam complaint entries into our database, MyWaters.
Hello, my name is Matt Seiler with Water Resource Division. Thank you, Charlie. I'm going to, during the last NOW meeting, there was some questions regarding how to report foam appearances on the lake. And so I put some slides together to outline how these can and should be reported. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a couple options. For those of you that aren't comfortable with using a computer, or maybe you don't have good service, one of the easiest options is to call the Pollution Emergency Alerting System and report the event. A operator will assist you, and it will walk you through the process of, there'll be several questions, and they will be, if you indicate it's a foam report, there will be specific questions related to the nature of the foam. They're going to be asking questions like wind speed, or conditions at the time. And you're not expected to know wind speed, but they will be asking, is it windy day? What is the temperature? They'll ask the appearance of the foam. Is it a dull color or a bright white? So just be aware of that. And then they're gonna ask questions on where you saw it along the lake shore, if that's where you're reporting. If you want to remain anonymous, you can. So that's one good option. Once you call that number 2, that report will end up going to the district, and it'll actually end up on my desk, and then I will enter it into our MyWater system. I'll have your contact information unless you desire not to be contacted. But if there's any questions, if I need some additional information that wasn't provided in the initial report, then I will contact you and get that information. Also, the other way to enter or report a foam event is through Water Resources Division's electronic database called MyWaters. I have the address here. Basically just enter that into the computer and you will get the MyWaters. You also, in case you don't remember this or you're not able to write this down, if you can just put MyWaters Eagle or MyWaters Water Resource Division, WRD, into your search engine, it should pop up, and it should be able to bring you to that MyWaters site. Okay, next screen, please. So when you do type in the MyWaters, this is what's going to show up. This is the first screen you are going to see, and you do not have to create an account. You only have to click on the report spill pollution and unauthorized activities right next to that blue arrow. You click on that and it brings you to the next screen. Next slide, please. It'll give you one more option. It just wants to specify whether you're just filing a general complaint or a spill incident or pollution report. And you'll want to click on the report spill incident pollution at the top of the blue arrow there. And again, it'll take you through a series of questions. It'll ask you if you're reporting a foam event. Once you do that, there'll be questions specific to foam events. And you'll be asked basically the same questions you would be asked if you were calling it in through the PEAS system. Again, once you report this and report it via MyWaters, it'll create an event. I will end up getting the report, and if there's any additional information that I require, I may contact you, reach out to you for additional information. But that's about it. Next slide. Your next speaker will be Puneet Vij with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So good evening, everyone. My name is Puneet Vij, and I'm a toxicologist with the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. Okay. As most of you might already be aware of MDHHS role, I'll go over it one more time, just for the newer audience. Our primary role is to understand the health concerns facing the community. So we closely work with EGLE and other agencies to investigate these PFAS sites. With EGLE, we develop a plan to investigate and address health risks where EGLE leads the site investigation and MDHHS and local health department lead the public health planning and response. We also evaluate PFAS exposures to residents in the community and recommend any public health action as needed. Next slide, please. Most of what we know about the toxicity of PFAS comes from studies of two specific compounds, PFOA and PFOS. Adverse health effects have been established in epidemiological and laboratory animal model studies for these PFAS chemicals. This slide provides some of the adverse health effects in humans associated with higher PFAS exposure from epi studies, which includes reduced fertility, increasing the chance of high blood pressure or preeclampsia in pregnant women, where preeclampsia is a pregnancy complication characterized by high blood pressure, a small decrease in the infant birth weight, and increasing cholesterol levels, especially total and low density lipoprotein cholesterol. Next slide, please. It also includes increasing the chance of thyroid disease and liver damage, decrease in the immune response to vaccines, and increasing chances of cancer, especially kidney and testicular cancer. Next slide, please. So these are the MDHHS comparison values, which are lowest of the two, screening levels and the approved MCLs. And we use this lower value to guide our public health recommendations. As a result, data above these comparison values will often trigger a precautionary public health response, such as distribution of filters, although the water may be fine to drink in that situation, but distribution of filters ensures a resident's continued protection while the investigation continues. Next slide, please. The MDHHS resampling effort is to understand PFAS fluctuations in drinking water wells. And this, along with the source area characterization or extent of plume contamination, will help support our final public health determination. Recently, we finished the first round of resampling, and this slide provides the round one resampling summary. And the result letters were also sent out at the beginning of this year. And our plan is to start another round of resampling in the first week of May. So just to give you a summary, in the round one, we collected samples from 277 wells out of 427 wells in the Oscoda area that were previously tested by Eagle. And out of those, we had 136 non-detects and 141 detections. And out of these 141 detections, there were 20 detections that exceeded the MDHHS comparison value. Next slide, please. So for our round two of our resampling effort, we will be reaching out to you via recruitment letters or phone calls for the residential well resampling. And the recruitment letters are going to go out this week. And for the first time, samples for this particular round will be door knocking. And this round was planned for this month of May to capture the seasonal homes. And when you have your recruitment letters, you can schedule an appointment with the sanitarian. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, since summer is here, foam due to PFAS should be avoided. Amount of PFAS in foam is usually higher than in the surface water, and swallowing PFAS foam could be a health risk. Swimming or bathing in the water is not a concern. So PFAS do not easily absorb to the skin, but hand-to-mouth behavior in children is a concern and creates an ingestion problem. So it's better to rinse off foam after contact and bathe or shower after outdoor activities such as swimming. Dogs can potentially swallow foam collected in their fur when grooming themselves. So it should be thoroughly rinsed with fresh water after contact with foam. This evaluation is based on a young child playing by the shore for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for 3 months a year during the summer. And this is a repeated, prolonged whole body exposure scenario and is most conservative. So as a general rule of thumb, regardless of the type, we recommend to bathe or shower after the day's activities to avoid any exposure. And historically, MDHHS also issued a statewide press release to avoid foam on water bodies that are known to have high levels of PFAS. Next slide, please. This slide highlights the do not eat advisories in Clarks Marsh. In 2012, MDHHS issued an emergency do not eat fish public health advisory for all fish taken from Clarks Marsh due to high levels of PFOS measured in fish fillet, and is still in effect. In the fall of 2018, MDHHS issued a do not eat public health advisory for deer taken within 5 miles radius of Clarks Marsh, which is also in effect. And more recently, in 2019, MDHHS issued a do not eat public health advisory for all resident aquatic and semi-aquatic wildlife taken from Clarks Marsh. This advisory was issued as a precaution due to high levels of PFOS found in muscle and organs of 1 deer out of 20 taken from around the base. MDHHS also recommends that no one should eat organs from any fish, deer, or other wild game in the state because many chemicals, including PFAS, can accumulate in their organs. Consumption of fish or wildlife caught from Clarks Marsh is a concern, but in case of fish, catch and release is fine. Okay, next slide, please. This slide will give you the fish sampling and result updates. So we recently received mercury and PFAS results back for yellow perch collected from Benetton Lake in 2018 and 2019. Currently, yellow perch from Benetton Lake are covered under the statewide advisory of 4 servings per month due to mercury. But the new data suggests that advisory be changed to 2 servings per month of yellow perch due to PFOS and mercury. Until yesterday, this was under internal review, but it got approved today. Next slide, please. As I mentioned previously, in 2018, MDHHS issued a do not eat advisory for deer harvested by hunting within 5 miles of Clarks Marsh. So in 2020, an additional 44 deer were collected from around Clark's Marsh and had muscle and liver tested for PFAS. The highest PFOS levels were 82.6 parts per billion, which was detected in muscle, and 2,970 parts per billion in liver. So based on the data and the relationship between detections of PFOS in liver samples and the collection location distance from Clark's Marsh, MDHHS recommends that the do not eat advisory be changed from within 5 miles of Clark's Marsh to within 3 miles of Clark's Marsh. MDHHS continues to recommend not eating kidneys or liver from any deer statewide because many chemicals, including PFAS, can accumulate. Okay, next slide, please. So this slide explains the updates on exposure, on Oscoda area exposure assessment. Right now, we are in the beginning stages of exposure assessment planning. We have formed our project teams, which includes a toxicologist, an epidemiologist, community engagement coordinator, and a health educator. And we have our next meeting planned for May 4th, which is next month. And we are in a process of forming our community advisory team, CAT. In this exposure assessment, MDHHS will ask for a blood sample and we will test it for PFAS analytes. Before the blood draw, participants will take a short survey about the ways they are getting exposed to PFAS. And we will keep the community informed as we make progress in this exposure assessment by these multiple meetings. Next slide, please. These are some of the additional resources where you can get more information related to PFAS and Eat Safe Fish guideline. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you so much. And I will give it back to Sue.
Thank you, Puneet. We are going to move on to the comments, question and answer session. But before we do that, we have just a short little poll that we're requesting you answer, and Les will pop that up. When we used to be able to meet in person, we could we could actually see each other. We had a good sense of how many people were attending our meetings. And we're asking, if you don't mind, if you would just respond to the poll and tell us how many people are watching this meeting with you, so we have an idea of how many people are actually in attendance. So if you would take just a moment to answer our poll, we would appreciate that. Give you just a few seconds here.
All right, Sue, can you see the poll? I'm sorry.
I can see the poll. I can see
Okay.
the poll question, yeah. Are you seeing responses come in, Les?
Yes, I am. We have 82% are watching alone, 16% are watching with one other person, and we have one responder who is watching with a total of 6 people are watching together.
Awesome, great, thank you. Okay, thanks much. All right, and we are just going to remind you of the instructions for how to ask a question. So Les, if you could go over that again, please.
Sure. We do have questions that are coming in, so I know that our attendees are finding the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to continue to type in your questions this evening. If you wish to speak to our panelists this evening, you can electronically raise your hand by swiping the hand icon. And for our, do have an attendee on the phone. And for our attendee on the phone, you may push the pound and the number 2 key to electronically raise your hand. Again, that's pound and number 2. I do see we have one hand raised already, and not now. So, so those are the ways to talk to the panel tonight.
Thanks, Les. I'll go ahead and get started with the questions, and we'll point these to the various agencies to respond to. And Arnie, I see your question about whether or not the slide deck has been made available to the public. We really thought we would be able to get it online today in time to share it on the web site, and it just didn't happen. So I will promise you that for the next meeting, we will make those slides available. And Les, is it possible to send the link out for the slides to the people who have registered for the meeting prior to the meeting?
Sometimes it depends on how large the slide deck is. We have to get it compressed down. Sometimes a super large, if it's a large amount of data, it's hard to send it by email.
Yeah, I'm thinking we could just send the link to the webpage where it's posted.
Yes.
Okay, we will try to get that done for the next meeting. All right, and another question from Arnie, and I believe this is for Beth. Of the 81 million spent on remediation since closure in 1991, how much has been spent for PFAS remediation and investigation?
Hey, Arnie, I don't know. That's a great question for Dr. Varley. So either you can ask it tomorrow night at the RAB meeting tomorrow night, or I can get back with you and ask her.
All right, thanks, Beth. Michael has a question or a comment. He says, I think you meant October 2020 on the slide, and I'm not sure which slide you're referring to, Michael.
It's a slide 10. There was
Okay.
a graph on slide 10.
Okay,
Yeah, I think both of the IRA timeframe, the timelines, I put 2021 as the first meeting, and those should be 2020. You're correct. So thank you.
thanks, Michael. From Kathy, what is the PFAS level of effluent / water coming out of both 3 pipes and the Van Etten Creek discharges?
I can take the 3 pipes. So I was checking into this. Sorry.
Beth, Kathy has a clarification. She's asking about PFOS and PFOA and not total PFAS.
Okay. So back in 2015, and we can follow up with more recent samples if we have them, but it was 1,147.4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS put together.
And that was the effluent coming out of,
It's not in effluent. It's not from one of the existing systems.
okay, she's asking about 3 pipes in Van Etten Creek.
Okay. And then Van Etten Creek, I didn't know if Water Resources wanted to answer that one. That's the outfall for CTS, Arrow Street. I guess CTS now.
So the central treatment system, I
Yeah.
mean, it's the data that we've presented, which is primarily non-detect with a few breakthroughs right before change out. So in terms of what that discharge was after the treatment system went in, that's being treated. Before that, I don't have that data available right now, but certainly could see if we have that.
That'd be great, Charlie. Be helpful. All right, and Rex has a question on SRDs. Since SRDs act as a permit for the Air Force, and since SRDs have an expiration date, will Eagle be using the expiration date opportunity to demand that the Air Force comply with Michigan's current regulations on groundwater, drinking water, cleanup, and GSI standards, ground surface interface standards for all IRAs? If the answer is no, then please explain why Eagle would choose not to use the SRD tool to force Air Force compliance.
This is Tarek Buckmaster, and I can respond to this question. SRDs are similar to permits, but they are not permits. They're circle-related documents, and it does not have an expiration date. So NPDES permits do have expiration dates, and SRDs do not. But we can still, Eagle can still modify an SRD to incorporate any necessary requirements that are appropriate for an updated SRD. In this case, the requirements in the SRD are based upon the treatment technology that is in place at the site. So the granular activated carbon treatment units. And so it's based on the requirements in the SRD are based upon the capabilities of that treatment system. So when we evaluate a potential discharge, we look at the capabilities of the treatment system to look at what the treatment technology based numbers would be, and then the water quality based numbers. And in this instance, the treatment technology based numbers are more restrictive than the water quality based numbers. The water quality based numbers are monthly averages, and the treatment technology standards are daily maximums. So the numbers in place in the SRD are actually more restrictive for PFOS and PFOA.
All right, thank you. We have a question from William, and then I'm going to go to a couple of hands that are raised here. And this is a bit of a long question, so bear with me. I'm concerned about the level of PFAS, especially those covered by Michigan's MCLs on the east side of Annetton Lake, south of Phelan Creek. There's a broad area of contamination, albeit at moderate levels in that area. There's never been significant industrial activity in that predominantly residential area. Eagle well testing has shown a broad area contaminated with the chemicals that typically made up AFFF used in the Wurtsmith area. Sampling around the various sites where the Air Force used AFFF to put out local fires typically show defined plumes that migrate in a relatively narrow path down the flow direction of the local groundwater, not the broad area in the Phelan Creek area. Both the USGS surveys and Eagle transistor study have an area of ambiguity about water flow direction in that area, with some indications of dependency on Van Etten Lake water levels. Absent any convincing data to the contrary, it seems probable that the contamination on the east side of Van Etten Lake comes from AFFF. Eagle, can you respond to that?
Sue, there's actually a second part to that question if you scroll down a couple.
Oh, okay. Let's see. What is Eagle doing to ensure that the Air Force investigates, as they promised earlier in the Restoration Advisory Board in the RAB, to follow the plumes entering Van Etten Creek to their end? In any case, given the pattern on the easy side of Van Etten Lake, Wurtsmith Air Force Base would seem to be the most likely source, despite their fervent denial. So the question, well, I am not seeing a particular question, but Mike, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think, let me see if I understand the question. So, you know, you're right in that you referenced the transducer study and some of those data gaps. So, you know, yes, our transducer study indicates that there is some hydraulic action near the shoreline that could be pushing the PFAS contamination into the lake, into those near shore wells, you know, 200 to 400 feet inland. And then also, you're also right that we have a data gap down at the southeast end of Van Etten Lake, and we don't fully understand all of what's going on down there. We anticipate that those to all be resolved by the Air Force in the remedial investigation, and they are required to determine the nature and extent of all contamination. So you're right. We just don't have that information yet.
And I see William has his hand raised. Did you want to add something? William? Yeah, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I want to say that the Air Force recently denied any intent to include that area in their comprehensive site model, and they have consistently denied vehemently any responsibility for the pollution in that area. So my real question is, how does Eagle intend to enforce the fact that, according to CERCLA, they're responsible for anything that seems probably caused by them, and they, to date, have refused to take any responsibility?
Yeah, all I can tell you, William, is, you know, we'll use the tools that we have available under the
this MOA dispute resolution. And so, you know, like anything where this goes, you know, if these can't be resolved and to our satisfaction for the citizens of Michigan, then, you know, the final option is to, you know, go to court.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to go over to Bob Delaney. Bob has his hand raised.
Hi, yeah. I had I think it was Puneet that was talking previously. Is that correct? So this is a question.
He gave the MDHHS presentation.
Okay, yeah, so this is a question for him.
Okay.
Quite a few years ago, we got fish data in Clark's Marsh, and we analyzed it for, I think, 14 different compounds. And some of the compounds aren't currently regulated even by MD or Eagle. And yeah, it was interesting that some of them, well, at least one, I think we couldn't detect in surface water, but it was biomagnifying in the fish. Have you gone back and looked at the data on the other contaminants that are out there in the water, and then what's magnifying in the fish? And is there any intent to see if that's magnifying up the food chain, or anybody doing studies like that on it?
I can look at the previous data. I don't have any answer for you at this point, but I can look into that data.
Okay, because I know some of the longer chain ones seem to be magnifying in the fish, but they were still at relatively low compared to the PFOS. They were relatively low, but relative to how much was in the water itself, that looked like the biomagnification was quite high. So that was always a red flag for me, seeing that. I don't think it was ever followed up on. So if you could take a look at that, we'd appreciate it.
Definitely. Yep, I can do that.
Bob, this is Brandon Armstrong with Eagles Water Resources Division. We are looking at doing a bioaccumulation study for PFNA and PFHXS this year. So those are just two additional compounds that we'll be taking a look at.
Yeah, I think it was like the 11 carbon chain or 10 that were of particular interest, because those are not spoken of much, and they was stuff we weren't seeing in the groundwater or the surface water, but one of them was showing up in the fish nonetheless. So that spoke to me of quite a high biomagnification, and I didn't know if that transferred up the food chain or not.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob. And Stephen Brown has his hand raised.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I put this in the Q&A, but I wasn't sure if that was being read. So, you know, given these exposures to PFAS by Oscoda residents, they've been going on for decades. So is there any plan for a health monitoring study by either MDHHS or ATSDR?
I can take that one. So MDHHS does have a plan for an exposure assessment at this point, and we have our meeting coming up next month on May 4th. But we don't have a plan for a health monitoring study. It's going to be an exposure assessment.
So, but no ongoing health monitoring study, huh?
Yeah, maybe Sue, do you want to provide more information?
Yeah, that's
on this?
correct. At this point, we are planning the exposure assessment, and there is no plan at this time for a health monitoring study. That meeting on May 4th is for the individuals who have indicated they were interested in serving on our community advisory team to advise us on that project. So the meeting date has been confirmed with those residents who indicated they were interested. But we'll keep you posted on the progress for the exposure assessment and, of course, the results that we receive from that.
Okay.
All right, so we have a question from Anonymous. Is the Eagle WRD considering or planning to revise any or all of the Wurtsmith substantive requirement documents to include PFAS other than PFOS, PFOA, for which Michigan has MCLs, or to impose more stringent discharge limitations for PFOS, PFOA than the ones currently in place.
Hello again, this is Tarek Buckmaster. I can respond to this. So at this time, we're not planning on revising the SRDs to address any other PFAS other than PFOS or PFOA. Michigan currently does not have water quality standards promulgated for any other PFAS chemicals. While we do have the standards, the MCLs, the discharge concentrations are different. They're established for protecting of water quality standards and not drinking water. And if we do establish other water quality standards, we can modify the SRDs to incorporate those requirements down the road.
All right, thank you. Question from Rex. Charlie Bauer's presentation had ending dates of 2019. What went on in 2020?
So the data that we presented goes all the way through 2021. It's all the data that we currently have available. In terms of actions, in terms of enforcement actions, we didn't take any enforcement actions, any additional enforcement actions in 2020, but we were following up on the enforcement actions that we took in 2019. So we did receive the additional PFAS data, which you saw tonight. And we are working on revising the monitoring plan to ensure that they're providing us all the information that we need. So we're working on follow-up to those, and we will continue to do ongoing inspections. So thank you.
All right, and a question for Matt. How does the department decide what foam reports to follow up on?
Hello, Matt Seiler. I do follow up on some of these foam complaints to try to find and locate a source. We do collect all of the data and we enter it into our MyWater system. So all those reports are, all that data is being collected for assessment section.
All right, thanks, Matt. And another question from Rex, and I'll leave this one for someone from Eagle. Who decided to pronounce the acronym EAGLE as if it had an extra vowel between the E and the G? My English teacher mother, God rest her soul, would be livid as to this mispronunciation by people who should know better. And I don't know that we know who decided to pronounce it that way, Rex. But comment, we hear your comment.
We can pass that on to our boss.
Yes, thank you. I see Jake Bennett has his hand raised.
There we go. Thanks. I guess I just want to keep pushing on this SRD. From my understanding, you guys have a surface water standard, which is more than the drinking water. Why can't you guys make it more in line with what the surface water standards are to push the Air Force? Because that's honestly, that's a huge barrier from us pushing the Air Force, is because you guys don't want to push them as to a lower SRD. And they were bragging that they can treat at non-detect levels. So why not push them to that?
So the requirements in the SRD are more restrictive than our water quality standards. The water quality standard for a non-drinking water discharge for PFOS is 12 as a monthly average. The limits in the SRDs are it's 20 for the FTO2 and it's 15 for the combined, but those are daily maximums also. So if they exceed 15 as a daily maximum, that's a violation of their SRD. If they were to discharge at 30 and then have non-detects the rest of the month, that average would be below the standard for a monthly average. So in actuality, the SRDs are more restrictive than both the water quality standard and the MCLs.
Because
And-
from my understanding, you guys set it at 20 and 40 because at that time it was a new treatment and you weren't sure how well it would work. And now that you guys know how well it works, why not lower that?
So those are the effluent limitations for the FTO2 system. But one thing is that FTO2 system does discharge back into the groundwater in the plume area. So the GSI is the point where the groundwater vents to the surface waters. That's where we would be determining compliance with the water quality standard, the GSI, at the the interface between the groundwater and the surface water. So even though it is 20 and 40, again, the vast majority of the time, the discharge from the treated effluent from the treatment system is non-detect, and it's just maybe occasionally during the carbon change out that the numbers are a little bit higher, but the treatment system is functioning as well as could be expected. And the greater concern is just getting more volume through that system.
All right, thanks for that question, Jake. From William, I recently spoke to a resident who was told his well levels of PFAS qualified him for a state furnished filter, which has been installed. He stated he had not been furnished with his well testing data. When could he expect that information? How would it be sent? Puneet?
If you can tell the resident to reach out to me so that I can look at the address, and because we sent all the result letters, but I'll be happy to talk to the resident, yes, and we'll provide him the information.
And I know you called quite a few residents too.
Yes, but
Yeah.
the result letters were also sent to everyone. So if they didn't receive it, yes, definitely ask them to give me a call.
All right, don't leave me yet. I have another question for you.
Yeah.
When will the venison report be available to the public?
It will be available really soon. It's in the final stages of approval. So really soon. That's what I can say right now.
Okay, thanks, Puneet. A question from Steve. How often are PFAS readings done on Van Etten Lake?
Is that a surface water, fish, or both question, I guess? Fish we tested last year. Those results are still pending. We probably will be monitoring Van Etten Lake every few years into the future. And surface water, we grab samples when we collect fish.
All right, thank you. A question from Mark Henry. Of the residential wells that were sampled and resampled on the east sides of Van Etten Lake, how many had not had PFAS, now have PFAS? And how many that had PFAS previously had levels that had reduced or are non-detect?
I don't have this information at this point from top of my head, but I can definitely reach out to you this week. I can look at all the data really quickly and we'll give you that information. If anything from non-detect, now they have a detectable level, or anything. So anyone who had detectable level of PFAS turned to non-detect. So I can give you all that information. I can reach out to you.
And Puneet, I think you answered the next question already. It's when are we expected to update the results in the deer testing? And you had just told us that that report would be available very soon.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And Tony, I see a question from you. Is the slide deck available online or otherwise? I was telling Arnie earlier in the meeting that we had tried really hard to get that posted today before the meeting so we could get that link out to you, and just couldn't quite make that work. So for the next meeting, we're going to get the slide deck posted before the meeting and share the link out so that you can follow along during the meeting. And a question from Angela. Has any testing on PFAS been conducted on Cedar Lake? Also, I have seen foam periodically on this lake. Should I be concerned?
We did collect a single surface water sample from Cedar Lake in 2019. PFAS was less than 1 part per trillion in that sample. We also collected bluegill and pumpkin seed from Cedar Lake in 2019, and all individuals had non-detectable concentrations of PFAS.
Puneet, can you talk about the foam advisory? There was a foam sample collected from Cedar Lake. Or Mike, you're on.
I'll jump in just to provide a little bit of information. There was foam sampling done on Cedar Lake, and PFAS was detected in the foam. However, it was significantly lower than PFAS concentrations in foam on Van Etten Lake. And I'll let Puneet speak to the advisory. I think there's just a general advisory to avoid all foam on all lakes.
Exactly. It's a general advisory to rinse off foam if you come in contact with it. And it was last year when for both Van Etten Lake and Cedar Lake, it was released. But yeah, it's a general one.
And we recommend rinsing off the foam because of the concern about putting hands in mouth and swallowing PFAS that might have been in the foam.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Question from Stephen. What can be done by government to prevent these outrageous and silent actions that expose us to health risks? I'm not sure which silent actions, Stephen, if you're with us and you would like to share a little bit more about that. Let's come back to that question. We do.
Sue?
Yeah.
We have, okay, now we have 3. We have a hand raised for the phone.
And I do see Stephen's got his hand raised, so let's go to Stephen.
Okay.
That was his question.
Yep, just a moment.
Yeah, hi. I mean, what I'm concerned about is that these kind of situations show up decades after the actual damage has been done. So what could the state of Michigan or the federal government do to prevent these kind of things in the future where we end up trying to correct toxic releases that have happened decades ago? Anyone?
Someone from Eagle?
Yeah, this is Mike Neller. I don't, that's the, $1 million question. You got to start up front as far as the approval of any compounds or, the testing that has to happen. So, this is PFAS is a prime example of something that is ubiquitous and is proven to be dangerous to our health and our environment. So, I don't have a good answer for you and what we can do other than we got to do the work up front. This is always the case when we deal with contaminated substances being released to the environment. If the work had been done up front to engineer better containment systems when they're using those chemicals in manufacturing or other processes, because we have these sites, we have 65 Superfund sites in the state of Michigan. And they're not PFAS, but they're dangerous chemicals. So most of those releases happened, 40, 50, 60 years ago before we either understood or recognized all of these hazards.
No, I agree, Mike. But the European Union has their REACH program because they've agreed that the precautionary principle needs to be invoked to prevent this kind of expense and exposures to the public. So I'm hoping we can all pull on the same oar and get the Toxic Substances Control Act reformed meaningfully.
I'm with you.
We have a hand raised from caller with the last four numbers 2489. And Les, can you remind us of the instructions for a caller to unmute?
Sorry, Sue, I'm taking care of something for the phone call here. It's all I have to do is just unmute them, and hopefully they will be able to talk.
Okay, thank you. Go
Sue,
ahead.
this is Dave Wade. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, Dave, we can hear you.
Okay, my question is, this question is towards Amanda. I've looked at the, we sent the slides for the 2019-2020 annual report for the monitoring wells, and I've reviewed all that data, and I'm kind of shocked because a lot of the data showed that the PFOS and PFOA and some of the PFHXS was over the current MCLs, but the new current monitor stuff, 2021, the slides that were shown tonight were showing that everything was under, or most was under. Amanda, can you explain that?
Well, in some instances, some of the locations did previously have higher concentrations and are now lower. In some instances, some well locations, we sometimes see an exceedance of a criteria, then the value that we get for a result in a subsequent event goes below criteria and then it comes back up. So we see fluctuations, but the slides that I presented were just the data that was collected in January of 2021. So historically, yes, there may have been some concentrations from the same location that were previously above, but in January, those were the results we had. Does that?
I mean, when I looked at some of these reports, it showed for the last 4 samplings that the averages were over the MCLs. And now for 2020 or for 2021, this one sample showed everything was under. And it's kind of strange that they would be over for the almost a year's period, and then they would drop. Can somebody explain to me how that happens?
Do you have a well location that you're describing that situation from?
Yeah, actually, MW005.
Is that one east of Cedar Lake?
Yeah, that's one. No, that's MW005. I think is the one on Van Etten Lake, over next to the island.
Okay, I would have to go back through the data and see how the previous sample results have looked and see if it looks like there's possibly a mistake that was made on the figures. And I can get back to you on that.
That's fine. I mean, the other ones that shows stuff down on the east side of the lake, down by the dam, which is MW032 and let's see, MW007. It shows pretty much the same thing. The last 4 samples were over for PFOS and PFHXS, and now they're showing that they're under. And again, I'd like to understand how they do the last 4 samples that are over and now they're under. I don't understand that.
Okay, we can definitely talk about that. But the figures that were put up for 32 or for 33 and 32, I think both had exceedances of the MCLs.
Okay.
Were highlighted in yellow. So it might have been a little bit difficult to see on the figures. I know, depending on how big your screen was, it might have been difficult to see, but all of those figures are going to be posted on the UMPART webpage, hopefully within the next week or two. So if you have specific questions about some of the data as to whether it's accurate or not, I can certainly talk about those things with you. But to the best of my knowledge, what was presented on the figures is accurate.
All right, yeah, I'd be interested to see that because I want to be able to. I'm building a graph, and I want to take a look at some of these monitoring wells and understand, why these things are all, carrying a year's worth of data that shows it over the MCL, and then it goes under, and it goes over, and it goes under. I mean, is that the season? Is it? I don't understand. So I want to understand it a little more.
Right. One thing that might help you as well is that in addition to those figures that were presented tonight, there'll also be a summary table that includes all of the sampling events over time that we've collected in the last year and a half. So it might be easier to look at that table, and I can definitely share that with you in the short term. And then it will also be
Okay.
on part page eventually.
Okay.
I have that table now that I could even get to you next or tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, and Kathy has her hand raised. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi there.
Hello.
Hi, Kathy Woosterbarth. I was hoping that I could take a few minutes just to update the public on the things going on with the NOW group related to multiple things that you presented. So, and then also encourage some participation. First of all, in the RAB meeting, that's tomorrow. It's virtual, of course, and that's at 5 o'clock. And we're encouraging comments and reports of foam and overall exposure risks to human health and the environment. You know, that interim remedial action is actually addressing those imminent risks. So we encourage people to call in and express what they believe is a risk. Now, of course, we've seen reports and, you know, images of foam, and just as a reminder, please do not stop reporting that. We need the Air Force to see those pictures. We need the state to see them, and we will continue to report that because it is not normal to see bright white foam on lakes. Also, we worked very hard on providing comments for the Clarks Marsh plan. We approached organizations, businesses, and individuals to support our thoroughly created and vetted comments, which were created through the work of NOW leadership, including Tony Spaniola, Dave Wynn, Greg Cole, Bob Delaney, Bill Palmer, and also the National Wildlife Federation and Michigan League of Conservation Voters were instrumental in creating and making the comments possible. 2 comment letters were created. One had general comments and the other had technical comments with slides that illustrated the limitations of the U.S. Air Force's plan for Clarks Marsh. Before that, we did hold a webinar to educate the public on the process of those comments and NOW's work of what we're doing now. And currently, multiple groups assisted with this webinar, including the National Wildlife Federation, Michigan League Conservation Voters, the Ecology Center, Clean Water Action. And we may have another webinar like that to prepare for the Van Etten Lake comments. We're also, with those efforts, we're attempting to gain momentum for the comments to show a sign of solidarity and have power in numbers, which is what those comment letters and those sign-ons do. We've been advised by the non-governmental organizations that we're partnering with that these sign-on letters are very powerful. And so I encourage anyone on this call, if they would be willing to respond to our requests for sign-ons once we do create some more comments, that would be really helpful. One thing we've done is met with our local convention and visitors bureau to discuss the economic impacts of local businesses. And we do believe that we can work parallel with both the chamber, the CVB, and businesses to ensure that adequate information is provided for anybody wanting information on PFAS info. Because as you can imagine, people are fearful of the PFAS, of the foam, of being, exposing their family and themselves. We do encourage in relation to the PFAS exposure assessment, we will encourage participation in that. And we are really blessed to have Courtney Kerrigan from MSU. She's an exposure scientist and epidemiologist as a scientific advisor for that process. She's familiar with these community-based projects, and we will be utilizing her as an advisor. We'll also be involved in the National Academy of Sciences guidance on PFAS testing and health outcomes project. This process will help develop useful Centers for Disease Control documents for physicians to advise their patients. Currently, there's a document which is very lengthy and it's sorely lacking in its usefulness for physicians. Next, we've been honored by Freshwater Future as a Freshwater Hero Award. Tony's going to be receiving that award on April 22nd. So we're very honored to receive that by Freshwater Future. Another item, the National PFAS Contamination Coalition has secured a monthly meeting with Richard Kidd, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Environment and Energy Resilience. He, along with 2 other PFAS community leaders, will be meeting with him monthly to discuss our concerns with, in general, with the DoD sites that are affected by PFAS. There's still a little bit more. Thanks for bearing with me here.
You go right ahead.
Okay. We do have a movie called No Defense, which we may have mentioned before. Currently, that movie is dedicated solely to showing what's happening in Oscoda. It was produced by Sierra Ganem. The movie is in the Vermont International Film Festival. There'll be a panel discussion on April 22nd. Again, this is going to be, Tony is going to be participating in this panel discussion. And that is Earth Day, by the way. A full release of that movie will be on iTunes on May 5th. It will have a cost of $9.95. But we do want to have an event to show, the producer wants to show this movie in Oscoda. So we're hoping to have that event at some point in the near future. And of course, we encourage the community to come out and support her for doing that, creating that movie, which, you know, we're very proud of. One other item is that there's a potential story from the show called Great Lakes Now. They're doing some taping and interviews for that for Oscoda. And I do want to mention Stephen, I think his name was, is what can we do to reduce, I guess, our exposure, or, you know, what can we do? And I say, you know, get involved, which it sounds like you're doing, Stephen. Of course, we can also stop using PFAS products and demand that they be considered toxic substances. So everyone has to do that on an individual basis, of course. And I encourage anybody who hasn't seen the movie Dark Waters to see that. It really is kind of the birth of how we got these products into our lives. And and then the other, these are just a couple comments on what some of the things that people asked. If you could, Amanda, or whoever has that number in front of you, share what those Cedar Lake foam results were. You said that they were lower than Van Lake, but hopefully all of the world is lower than Van Etten Lake in terms of foam amounts or foam PFAS amounts. So if you could tell us, I can't recall it. I want to say it's 2270 or something parts per trillion.
Kathy, I don't know that number off the top of my head. I'd have to look that up. So I think we've shared it with you guys in the past, but I'll definitely try to track it down and get that sent to you.
Thank you. That's all I have. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kathy. And we will be issuing another press release as we get closer to the summer season, reminding people about the foam advisories in the state. All right, a question from Tess. Where can I find Michigan's maximum contaminant levels for PFAS in fish and wildlife? When were these standards established, and when or will Eagle be reviewing and updating these standards in the near future? Brandon, is that a question for you?
Sorry, I think that would be a question for DHHS, how they derive their screening levels for fish.
Puneet?
Yes. So they're asking, where can they find if I can send that document and if we have Tessa's email ID, that will be great. We can send the link.
Yeah, and also on our Eat Safe Fish webpage, so it's michigan.gov/eatsafefish, there's a tab for reports and science, I believe it's called.
Yes.
And there's more information there about the scientific reports are there, but also more information about the values.
Mhm. But if you can't find it, definitely if you have your email ID, I can email that link to you.
All right, and Puneet, I think you already answered this question from Arnie. Is the deer study and data report used in the decision today to reduce Clark's Marsh restricted area from 5 miles to 3 miles available to us? And Puneet did say that report is in the process of being finalized and it would be available soon. Puneet, did you have anything else to add to that?
No, I don't have anything else to that.
Okay. All right, a question from Paul, and I think I can take this one. Are there any home water filtration systems that remove PFAS? There are some home filtration systems that are certified to reduce 2 of the PFAS, PFOS and PFOA. There are no systems that are certified to reduce all PFAS. If you're looking for a filtration system, you want to be looking for NSF's ANSI standard 53 for PFOA and PFOS reduction. You might also see on the package still the certification P473, which has been retired and is transitioning over to standard 53. So if you're looking on the box at your filter or looking online for a filtration system, look for P473 and then also standard 53. But after that standard 53, make sure it says certified for PFOS and PFOA reduction because standard 53 does cover other contaminants. Question for Dave, for Amanda. I've reviewed, Dave, I'm not sure if this is a question you already asked. I've reviewed the 2019-2020 annual report and a good portion of the monitoring wells showed PFOS and PFOA a good amount above the current state MCLs, but the new slides show PFOS and PFOA under the MCLs. And Amanda, I think that's the question that you answered for Dave already.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Right. If I
Thanks, Dave.
didn't answer it completely, I'll follow up with them. So.
Okay. Question from Bill. Why have you not modified water quality standards to reflect Michigan MCLs? And that would be a question for Eagle.
Yeah, this is Brandon, Eagle Water Resources Division. Our surface water quality standards are different than the drinking water MCLs. There's different methodology in how those numbers are derived. So that's why they haven't been changed to reflect those MCLs.
All right, thank you. A question from Luana. In regard to the wells that tested higher for PFAS in drinking water, is there a way to determine which properties in those vicinities are affected? Puneet, this might be for you, but I can tell you that MDHHS does not release individual well results, so we wouldn't be able to tell you which properties are affected. Do you have anything to add, Puneet?
In this one, okay, drinking water. So I'm just assuming it's a residential well. So if it's higher in the drinking water, so maybe that is in the area of concern. And if there is any residence close to that high PFAS number, they should contact us and we can add them in the next round of resampling.
Okay, thanks, Puneet. A question from Arnie. He has Eagle and Eagle, so I don't know if you're directing these questions to Eagle, Arnie. Some of them might be for us, but let me read here. The do not eat advisory signs on the Au Sable River may be beneficial to minimize human exposure for non-migratory species. However, the three major migratory fish go out to Lake Huron and are catchable without any PFOS advisory. Question 1, regarding an email I sent on April 14th, that being me, where are the walleye and Atlantic salmon test data from 2018 to the mouth of the river last year? And question 2, why isn't there more aggressive sampling planned in 21 and 22 of these migratory species as soon as possible?
I can take that question. So we did test Atlantic salmon collected from the Au Sable River in 2018. PFOS range from just under 1 part per billion to 6 parts per billion. So that wouldn't justify any advisory for PFOS. There are advisories for other species of salmon in Lake Huron due to PCBs. We tested steelhead from the Au Sable in 2013. PFOS range from 7 to about 28 parts per billion. But again, the advisory for steelhead from Lake Huron is going to be driven by PCBs and not PFOS. In 2018, we did not collect walleye. We collected smallmouth bass. PFOS range from about 1.7 to 52 parts per billion. And that do not eat advisory is still in place for bass from the Au Sable River. The last time we tested walleye from the river was in 2013, 2014. PFOS ranged from about 10 parts per billion to 33 parts per billion. And those advisories are going to be driven by dioxins, not PFOS.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Question from Tony. Is Eagle planning to establish water quality standards for the 5 PFAS compounds other than PFOS and PFOA, for which there are MCLs in place?
This is Brandon again. We are taking a look at the PFAS compounds that have MCLs and trying to determine if enough data is available to drive our surface water quality standards.
All right, thanks. Kathy wants to know if we can get the slides to them tonight before the RAB meeting. I'm not sure if we can get them to you tonight, but we can get them to you tomorrow before the RAB meeting. We will do that. From Arnie, continuing his question on fish. I believe the Atlantic salmon results of 2018 samples set consumption advisory for 2 to 4 meals per month. Why no apparent concern to sample these fish after they left the Au Sable River, or an advisory consuming Lake Huron Atlantic salmon, steelhead, and walleye? Brandon, you may have partially answered that question. Do you have anything to add?
Nope, just hammer on that other contaminants are going to be in play there for the advisory.
Yeah.
Species.
I think we covered that one. Question from Paul. I'm in an area where the MDHHS has issued a health advisory to not drink the water from my well. My well has never tested above the drinking water numbers, not even close. And as far as I know, nobody in this vicinity on the east side of the lake has ever exceeded the drinking water standards. Does the state still have an active advisory for my area east of Van Etten Creek? And if so, will the state reimburse me for being forced to hook up to municipal water as a result of their health advisory?
So MDHHS does not have a do not drink advisory, but we do recommend point of use filters for those homes if you have a detection for PFAS, or if the PFAS level exceeds our comparison value.
Okay.
Sue, this is Bill Farrell. If I could add
Sure.
to that question. Yeah, my name is Bill Farrell. I'm a toxicologist with DHHS. I think one thing to keep in mind is that for these PFAS sites, when we do the initial sampling, we may recommend a point of use filter. And the purpose of the filter is not necessarily because the levels are a health concern, but it's more, we only have one data point. and we don't know if the levels could fluctuate over time. We need to understand, we need to do more investigation. We need to understand what the long-term exposures could be. And that's the purpose of this resampling. Now we're going back to all these sites and we're resampling, and we're going to resample a number of times. And then based on that information, we're going to make final public health determinations. So in some areas where people may be using a point of use filter and the levels may be below our comparison values. As we get more data, we're going to make final determinations, and we may likely determine that, in these particular areas, you no longer need a filter. So it's kind of a process over time of collecting data and making these final determinations.
Thanks, Bill. Kathy found the results from the foam in Cedar Lake at 7,260 parts per trillion. And I'm going to go to Bill, who's got his hand raised. Bill, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, this is Bill Palmer, Oscoda Township trustee. I've had a number of residents question what the scheduling is by the state for sampling and testing the municipal water. I know there was a period where it was being tested fairly regularly. I believe that's changed to not quite as often. The concern with a lot of residents here is that even with the remedial actions that are taking place, there's still a lot of plumes emanating from the base that eventually flow, well, either into Clark's Marsh or the AuSable River directly, or into Van Inten Lake, which ultimately flows into the AuSable, all of which inevitably flows into Lake Huron. So the concern is that could be affecting our municipal water source. And given the situation here in Oscoda, is there any plans by the state to test that source maybe a more regular basis than some of the other municipal sources around the state? And in response, and if I might, just response to one of the previous questions about the hooking up of residents to the municipal water, we are in the process of the township here to extend municipal water lines, and we are allocating funds so that the residents will not have to pay for the hookups to the municipal water. But in conjunction with that, we're concerned that the municipal water is going to stay suitable for drinking. So I'm just wondering what the schedule is, and I've had several residents ask me about that.
Someone from Eagle? On municipal.
Hi,
water.
it's Mike. I would suggest that they contact Ian Smith of our drinking water unit. Ian will know what the schedule is for the Hushra water intake, how often that will be sampled. Bill is right. We the state, were funding that sampling, and it was being done monthly for quite some time. Unfortunately, Bill, I don't know what the new schedule will be, but Ian, who is not on the call tonight, will know, and that's Ian Smith from our drinking water section. And we will try to get his phone number put over in the chat area. So we'll get that pretty quick out there. I'll look it up and put it, I don't know if I can do that, but I'll get it. Somehow I will get it out there for you yet tonight.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I just don't happen to know. We're changing around schedules, and we'll get that.
Get that to you, Bill.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Tony, you have a question? I see your hand raised.
Can you hear me now, Sue?
I can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this question is for DHHS. And then I have a follow-up for Eagle after that. But The safety level for setting the line of demarcation on the do not eat the fish, as I understand it, for the Au and Clark's Marsh, is 300,000 parts per trillion for PFOS. And I believe that level was set 9, 10 or more years ago. There's been a lot of developments in the science, and that 300,000 number, to me as a layman, seems awfully high. Does DHHS have in mind taking a look at the science on that and perhaps revising that number?
Hey, I can take that too. So we are actually working on it in terms of revising these numbers. We are looking into the current science, and two of our toxicologists, they are working on it.
Thank you. Thank you. And then for Eagle, I would like to ask Eagle to reconsider what I believe its position is with regard to enforcement against the Air Force on the fire sites. For example, the school in particular, I think Colbath is another one. In light of the fact that the Air Force and DOD knew, perhaps not the people spraying the foam at the time, but the people in the Pentagon knew, and this has been documented, that the AFFF foam was a health hazard at the time that it was used in these fires, that Eagle reconsider its posture and take a look at trying to enforce some cleanup efforts against DOD on those sites.
Yeah, Tony, I hear you.
Thanks.
All right, we have a question from Angela. Where can I get my well tested? And is there an address to send water samples?
I was going to let Puneet speak to this too, possibly, but you can make a request for sampling to be done. There's a link on the DHT2's webpage, the health department's webpage, to put in that request. I don't have that link right now, but if you wanted to get contact information for either Puneet or I, this is Amanda Armbruster with Eagle. If we're going to bring that up again, you can email or call either of us, and we could take a look at what your address is and see if you're in an area where we are approving free sampling, or possibly see if you can get in on the sampling initiative that DHHS is completing. And you wouldn't be sending the water samples yourself. Somebody would collect those samples for you.
Exactly. I was going to add that you don't have to send your water sample somewhere. So a sanitarian will be there to collect that. So thank you.
And Angela, I do have slides at the end with Puneet's and Amanda's contact information, so you can collect it there. And we have one more question. If a resident's domestic well, this is from Mark, if a resident's domestic well tests positive for PFAS, does the state reach out to the surrounding residences to test their wells for PFAS?
So if the result is alarmingly high, yes, we reach out to surrounding residents. And then if it's in the area of concern too, if there is a result with PFAS, we look at the surrounding residents if they have municipal water or if they are on residential well. So yes, we reach out to those residents, and like in this round 2, we are going to reach out via phone calls or recruitment letters. But like Amanda mentioned previously, you can also make a request of testing your water. And if you are in the area of concern, we'll contact you and we'll sample your well.
All right, those were all of our questions, and they were good ones. Thank you, everybody, for submitting those. Just a couple more things
So,
here.
Sue?
Yeah.
I didn't know, can Bill Palmer see Ian Smith telephone number in the chat area there? If not, Bill, if you have something to write with, I'm happy to read that number to you. So I'm hoping that Bill has a pencil ready. So the number for Ian Smith, who is with Drinking Water Program, is 517-256-2474. And he'll be able to answer your question on the sampling of the Hushra water plant.
Thanks, Mike. Much appreciated. All right, just a couple more things here and we will get you going. Yes, a reminder of the RAB meeting tomorrow night. It will be held from 5 until 8 p.m. If anyone is interested in attending and they don't quite know how to attend, I'm going to drive you around the PFAS response webpage for just a second here. Or at least I think I am. And are you able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. On the PFAS response webpage, there's this MPART tab. And if you click this little arrow, it will take you to the public meeting calendar, which is the page that's showing here. And you can see all of the public meetings that are scheduled, the MPART public meetings that are scheduled. And that Restoration Advisory Board meeting is here. And this will give you the information on the meeting and the link to register for that. Same for other meetings. Some of you probably went here to get to tonight's meeting. And you can see there's a Grayling meeting next week. So if you click on those, it will tell you how to register. You can find the investigations that are going on around the state under the investigations button. And if you go to PFAS sites, if you're looking specifically for the Escoda sites, you would click on the PFAS sites and there's this little box here which allows you to do a search. So you could type in Escoda and you would find all of the Escoda sites. And you can search by the site name, the county, zip code. Yeah, so you can find all of the sites there. You can find the map with the now 162 PFAS sites in the state. There's a lot of information on the PFAS response webpage. There's a health tab, drinking water, testing, the fish and wildlife tab, information about foam. So just wanted to give you a quick tour of the webpage. You can find that at michigan.gov/PFAS response. All right, and a couple of additional resources. If you're looking specifically for the Wordsmith page, it's michigan.gov/wordsmith, and there will be links from that to the other Escoda pages. There's a lot of information there going back to when this investigation began, so a wealth of information there. And then here's that PFAS response webpage. Here's that contact information I mentioned, Beth's information, Charlie's information, Amanda and Matt. I'll leave this here for just a second for you. And then we have the MDHHS and the DNR contacts. Tammy Newcomb was not able to attend tonight. She was away at a conference. Usually attends our meetings and is just a wealth of information. So that's it for this evening. Oops, Arnie has a question. Hold on just one second here. Will the text of the questions be included with the link to the video? I don't know if that's possible.
Well, we'll try to get the questions out to you, Sue, and then how you distribute it or how it's distributed to the MPART page. I'm not sure how that happens, but we'll get the list of the questions to whoever needs to get it distributed.
Okay, thanks, Les.
You're welcome.
And we will be sharing this recording in a few days. It will be posted on the web pages with, it has to be closed caption first. So give us a couple of days to get that done. And then I will get those slides out to you sometime tomorrow before the RAB meeting. So once again, thank you for your time. Thank you for attending. So appreciate all of the work that all of you are doing to protect your community. And we'll keep trying to do the same, and we'll see you again at our next meeting. Still trying to stay to that quarterly schedule, so we'll likely be back in July with this community update. Thanks again, everyone. Have a good evening. Stay safe.